Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
From AI-inspired insights from farmers.
If you're enjoying what we're doing here, we'd love to hear from you too.
Absolutely.
Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and definitely leave a comment telling us what you want to see more of on this deep dive.
We're always looking for new ideas, and we really value your feedback.
So what farm-related mysteries are you dying to uncover?
Right.
What questions are keeping you up at night? Let us know, and maybe we'll tackle them in a future deep dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into agricultural carbon credits. It's a topic generating a lot of buzz, especially if you're maybe new to farming or thinking about starting out.
Absolutely. We've looked at a whole stack of sources to really unpack the money side of things, the complexities you might run into with these carbon markets.
Right. Our goal here is to try and cut through some of the noise, give you some clarity if you're weighing this up for your own farm. We don't want to overload you, just lay out the facts.
Exactly. We'll be looking at, what farmers might actually see in terms of income, what the costs are, how these credits even get priced.
And the role of the middlemen, the companies involved, and maybe a peek at where this whole thing might be heading.
That's the plan. It's an evolving area, for sure.
Okay, so let's start with the money, the real revenue split. You sometimes hear about these quite attractive signing bonuses, maybe $10, $15 an acre.
Yes, those initial figures can sound tempting, but it's really important to look beyond that initial payment to the longer-term reality.
Before we go further, maybe just quickly, what exactly is a carbon credit in this farming context for anyone totally new?
Good point. So basically, one carbon credit usually stands for 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. That's CO2 or gases with similar warming effects.
Okay.
And it represents that amount either being pulled out of the atmosphere and stored, like in soil,
Yeah.
or prevented from being released in the first place. It's like a verified unit of climate benefit.
Got it. So going back to the price, you mentioned the reality check. What are we actually seeing for cropline credits right now?
Well, according to data, like from the Center for Agricultural Profitability, the current market price is hovering around just $5 per ton.
$5. Okay, that's quite a bit different from a $15 per acre bonus. How does that $5 per ton translate to what a farmer might earn per acre?
Yeah, that's the crucial calculation. Estimates suggest you might need somewhere between, say, 5 to 10 acres, maybe even more, depending on the practices and conditions.
Right.
Just to sequester 1 extra ton of carbon in a year.
So even if you manage to generate that credit, you're spreading that $5 payment over quite a few acres.
Exactly. The per acre income can end up being, well, pretty small. That initial idea of quick money can fade pretty fast when you see the potential margins.
And then there are the intermediaries, right? The aggregators you mentioned. What's their role and how do they affect that $5?
Right, aggregators. These are companies that basically bundle together credits from lots of different farmers. It makes it easier to sell larger volumes to buyers.
Okay, makes sense.
But they take a cut. It's common to see contracts where the aggregator takes a significant chunk of the sale price, maybe around 33%. A third isn't unusual.
A third. Wow. So on that $5 credit.
The farmer might only see about $3.35 per ton, and that's before any other costs are factored in.
So if you need, say, 10 acres for that ton, you're looking at maybe 30, 40 cents per acre?
Potentially, yes. Maybe up to 60 or 70 cents if it's closer to 5 acres per ton. But you see the scale, it's often quite low on a per acre basis for the actual long-term payment.
We do hear these much higher predictions sometimes. Prices like $170 a ton down the line. Should farmers be banking on that?
Look, those higher prices are definitely being talked about as a future possibility. But it's really critical to understand that speculation. It's not today's market.
So don't build your business plan around it just yet.
I wouldn't advise it. Decisions now really need to be grounded in the current prices, which, like we said, are much, much lower.
Okay, that makes sense. But why would an aggregator offer those bigger signing bonuses then if the long-term rate is potentially so low?
Well, there could be a few reasons. Maybe they're launching a pilot program and need to get farmers signed up quickly, so they offer a sweetener up front.
Yeah.
Or they might actually be speculating themselves. They might be hoping those future prices do go up, so they want to lock in contracts now at lower underlying rates.
So they secure the supply now, hoping to sell it for more later.
Potentially, yes. It highlights why you need to look carefully at the whole contract, not just the initial bonus.
Right. And some groups are raising concerns about this, aren't they? That the markets aren't really set up to benefit farmers.
That's true. Organizations like the Alliance Against Farm Bill Offsets have voiced worries that the current structure might favor intermediaries over the farmers doing the work.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to verification costs. Because it's not enough to just say you're storing carbon, right? It needs to be proven.
Absolutely. Verification is key for credibility. Buyers need assurance that the carbon credit represents real, measurable sequestration.
And how is that done? What does it involve?
Traditionally, it often involves soil sampling and analysis, taking physical samples and sending them to a lab. But that conventional method can be quite expensive.
Expensive how?
Well, you've got the cost of collecting the samples accurately across fields, the lab fees, the interpretation of the results. It adds up.
So who pays for that? Is that cost on the farmer, or does it come out of the credit payment?
That's a really critical detail in the contract. It varies. Some agreements might put the onus on the farmer to cover those verification costs up front. Others might say the costs will be deducted from the proceeds when the credits are eventually sold.
Either way, it eats into that already potentially small net return we talked about.
Precisely. It's another layer of cost that has to be accounted for. And it's not just theory. We've seen reports, for example, from India, where farmers faced long delays in getting paid, partly because the verification process was complex and costly.
So it can impact not just the amount, but also when you get paid.
Definitely. Understanding the verification process, who's responsible for the costs, and how it impacts payment timelines is crucial.
Okay, so we have low current prices, potentially high acreage requirements, aggregator cuts, and now verification costs. Let's talk about how these credit prices are actually set. It sounds like it's not very transparent.
That's largely true. Unlike, say, corn or soybeans, where you can easily find market prices, getting precise, real-time data for agricultural carbon credits is often difficult.
Why is that?
Well, there isn't really one big central public exchange. A lot of the trading happens in sort of more opaque private deals or on platforms where you might need to pay for access to detailed market data.
So what could actually push prices up significantly?
The biggest potential driver would likely be strong government climate policies. Think things like a clean electricity standard, for example.
How would that work?
Well, if large emitters, like power companies, are mandated to reduce their emissions, they might be allowed to buy agricultural carbon credits to help them meet those targets. That creates demand.
Okay, that makes sense. Increased demand could lead to higher prices.
It could, but the big if is whether and when those kinds of strong policies actually get put into place.
Right. There's a lot of uncertainty there.
Exactly. Without those strong regulatory drivers creating consistent demand, big jumps in prices in the near term seem less likely.
What about the voluntary markets we hear about, where companies buy credits not because they have to, but maybe for PR or sustainability goals?
Yes, the voluntary carbon market is a significant part of the picture, but it's generally seen as even more volatile and, frankly, has faced a lot of criticism about quality and integrity.
Integrity issues? Like what?
Well, there have been numerous reports and concerns about so-called phantom credits.
Phantom credits.
Yeah, credits sold that don't actually represent real additional carbon reductions. It's led to increased scrutiny, sometimes causing delays in project approvals and payments, as we saw mentioned in some cases in India.
That sounds problematic. If buyers lose confidence, the whole market suffers.
Precisely. There's a big push now for better standards and more transparency in the voluntary market to try and address these integrity concerns.
Is that why some places like India are trying to set up their own systems?
That seems to be a major motivation. By creating its own regulated market specifically for agriculture, the idea is to have clearer rules, better oversight, and ensure more of the value flows back to the farmers rather than getting lost in complex international voluntary markets.
Interesting. That brings us back to the intermediaries and market dynamics. Beyond the aggregators, who else is involved in this chain?
You often have project developers. They might design the specific carbon project. Then there are consultants who advise farmers, and of course the auditors who do the verification we talked about.
So potentially several layers of people or companies between the farmer and the final credit buyer?
Yes, and each of them typically takes a share of the revenue generated from selling the credits.
What are the risks for the farmer in dealing with, say, an aggregator? You mentioned payment depends on them selling the credits.
Right. A big risk is counterparty risk. Your payment often relies on the aggregator successfully marketing and selling those credits. If the aggregator runs into financial trouble or even goes bankrupt, their lenders usually get paid before the farmers who supplied the credits. The farmers could be left with nothing.
That's a huge risk for someone just starting out.
It absolutely is. And even if things go well, the payment timelines can be really long. We're talking potentially several months, sometimes over a year, if your payment is tied to when the credits are actually sold.
So you need to really scrutinize the contract terms around when and how you get paid.
Definitely. What happens if payment is delayed? What recourse do you have? These are critical questions.
And there's the concern, mentioned in the context of India again, about these middlemen just taking too large a slice of the pie.
Yes. The Center for Science and Environment reported on situations where project developers, consultants, auditors, they absorbed a very large percentage of the carbon credit revenue, leaving very little for the farmers who actually changed their practices.
It sounds like a familiar story in some agricultural markets.
It does. And groups like the Alliance Against Farm Bill Offsets echo these concerns here too, worrying about corporate intermediaries capturing most of the benefits.
So looking ahead, what's the outlook? Are things likely to improve for farmers? Is there anything on the horizon that might help?
Well, there are some potential positive developments. In the U.S., there's the Growing Climate Solutions Act. The idea behind it is to get the USDA more involved in setting some standards and creating an online platform with information for farmers.
So more transparency and maybe some standardized approaches?
That's the hope. It aims to make the market a bit more farmer-friendly, provide more reliable information.
But that act alone doesn't automatically mean higher prices or zero risk, right?
No, absolutely not. It would be a step towards clarity and maybe some basic standards, which is good. But it doesn't solve the fundamental issues of potentially low prices or market volatility.
And it comes back to that basic question. Is the payment actually enough to make it worthwhile for farmers to change how they operate?
Exactly. That's the core issue raised by groups like the Center for Science and Environment. Right now, the general feeling from many analyses is that the current compensation levels often aren't sufficient to really drive widespread adoption of these practices.
So what's needed then? Stricter rules?
Many argue that robust regulation and uniform standards are essential to protect farmers' interests and ensure the environmental integrity of the credits.
We talked about India exploring things like using smartphones for verification or farmer cooperatives. Could those models help?
They could offer pathways. Using technology for cheaper verification, farmers banding together in cooperatives to get better bargaining power, direct payment systems. These are all strategies aimed at getting more money directly to the farmer.
But overall, there's still quite a bit of skepticism about whether these markets are the best way forward for agriculture and climate.
Yes, there definitely is. Organizations like the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, or IATP, and Friends of the Earth raise significant doubts.
What are their main arguments?
They often point to the potential for market failures, the low and volatile prices we've discussed, the scientific questions around how permanent carbon storage in soil really is.
Right. Impermanence is a big one.
And also concerns that these markets could accelerate corporate consolidation in agriculture, favoring larger operations. They often argue for direct public funding for conservation programs instead.
So invest directly in supporting sustainable practices rather than relying on creating a complex market.
That's the alternative vision many propose. It's a very different approach.
Okay, this has been a really comprehensive look at the complexities. Given all this, what's your sort of exclusive bonus insight? If a new farmer is considering this, what's the most crucial advice to try and maximize potential revenue while being fully aware of all these risks?
Okay, if you're going to wade into this, acknowledging all the risks, the absolute #1 piece of advice is get legal counsel. Thoroughly review and understand every single clause in any carbon contract before you sign anything.
Don't just skim it.
No. Pay super close attention to payment schedules. When, how, based on what? Who is responsible for verification costs and how are they paid? What's the contract length? How can you get out of it if needed? What happens to your farm data? Critically, could a lien be placed on your land?
Wow, a lien. Okay, that's serious. Legal review is non-negotiable then. What else?
Second, do a really careful cost-benefit analysis of the required practices. What exactly do you have to change on your farm? What was it cost you in terms of time, inputs, maybe new equipment? Use tools like Comet Farm is one example to get a realistic estimate of how much carbon you might actually sequester.
And compare that potential income to the costs.
Exactly. And make sure those practices actually fit with your farm's long-term goals for sustainability and soil health, not just chasing short-term credits.
Good point. What's number 3?
Third, keep your expectations realistic about market prices. Remember the volatility. Don't build your financial plans around those speculative high future prices. Base your decisions on current market realities and what your net return might be after the aggregator takes their cut and verification costs are paid.
Ground everything in today's numbers. Makes sense.
Fourth, this might be more down the road, but keep an eye out for opportunities for farmers to work together, maybe through cooperatives or other forms of aggregation where farmers have more control.
Like the India example.
Yes, gaining more direct market access could improve bargaining power and cut down on the number of intermediaries taking a slice. It might not be easy for a brand new farmer right away, but it's something to be aware of for the future.
A potential long-term strategy. Okay, and lastly,
Fifth, stay informed. This whole area is changing fast. Keep up with regulations like the Growing Climate Solutions Act if it moves forward, and developments around market standards, like the core carbon principles from the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. These things will impact how the market works and what protections farmers might have.
so legal advice, cost analysis, realistic pricing, think about future collaboration, and stay informed. That's a solid checklist.
It covers the key bases for navigating this complex space while acknowledging those significant risks we've discussed throughout.
It really underscores that this isn't simple. The agricultural carbon market has potential, maybe, but for new farmers especially, it's packed with complexities and risks.
Absolutely. Thorough research, that legal advice we stressed, and a very clear-eyed view of the financials are essential before signing any agreement.
Right. And definitely check out some of the resources mentioned, like the Center for Agricultural Profitability or tools like Comet Farm, and keep tracking policy news.
Good advice.
So that brings us to our final thought for you to take away today. Thinking about everything we've discussed, the low prices, the costs, the intermediaries, the uncertainties, what kind of support and what safeguards do you think are most crucial to make sure carbon farming can actually deliver real benefits for farmers and for the climate? Something to ponder as this market continues to evolve. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this exploration has been valuable.
Hitting that like button and smash that subscribe.